December 21st, 1989. A dictator was standing before tens of thousands of people, expecting applause. But within seconds, the crowd turned, and within 72 hours, he was dead by the worst fate he could ever imagine. This is how absolute power dies in 3 days. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy videos where we uncover past brutalities. Nicolae's beginning. For over 23 years, Nicolae Ceaușescu ruled Romania with terror that was so complete that even neighboring countries were terrified. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Children reported their parents, and speaking against the whole regime, even in whispers, could mean disappearance. This guy made Kim Jong-un's brutality look like child's play. 1 in 4 Romanians was either a security agent or an informer in that era. The secret police network was so extensive that trust was a luxury that no one could afford. You couldn't even complain about food shortages, even when your own children would be starving to death. You couldn't question why entire neighborhoods were demolished for the dictator's palaces, and speaking against it would mean that you would die. Moreover, you wouldn't even ask why women were being forced to stay for mandated gynecological exams to ensure they were bearing children for the regime, and nothing for no one else. Ceaușescu had even banned contraception and abortion entirely in his era. Women were basically breeding machines for the state, and the result? Tens of thousands of abandoned children living in orphanages that would shock the world when the truth was finally exposed after his death. However, Ceaușescu and his wife Elena lived like complete royalty. They were the gods of Romania. They even built the Palaces of Parliament, the second largest administrative building in the world, which required the demolition of entire historic neighborhoods, and even displaced over 40,000 people. This is the type of brutality they were into. While families froze in unheated apartments, Ceaușescu imported marbles from around the globe and even commissioned chandeliers that weighed tons. His palace consumed more electricity in a single day than most Romanian cities did in a month. Every home, by law, had to display portraits of Nicolae and Elena. They were meant to be worshipped like gods, and if you removed their picture, it was basically treason. But on December 21st, 1989, this illusion of divine power was shattered in real life on live television in front of the whole nation. This just goes to show that putting things on force can only work for so long. Once the people who seemed like they adored you because of all the brutality that you enforced on them get the chance to undo the power, they would absolutely do so, even if it means going against their dictator. I'm doing a $100 Amazon gift card giveaway to celebrate when this channel reaches 1,000 subscribers. No action is required to enter. I'll randomly pick a winner once we hit the milestone. If you want to follow the journey or see the winner announcement, feel free to subscribe. The infamous speech. December 21 was supposed to be his usual routine. Ceaușescu had called a massive rally in Bucharest's Palace Square to address the unrest in one of the places where protests had erupted after authorities tried to evict a Hungarian Reformed pastor who was quite popular at that time. Security forces had opened fire on the protesters just days earlier, and dozens were killed and hundreds were wounded. Bodies were even loaded into trucks and driven away, while families were never even told what happened to them. It was a massacre that Ceaușescu believed would end the dissent immediately, just like the violence had ended every single previous challenge to his rule for the century. The rally was to show strength. Workers were taken from factories, military units even stood at attention, and the crowd knew exactly what was expected. Applause on cues, chants on loyalty, and even visible support for the first few minutes. Everything was going according to plan. Ceaușescu even began speaking about achievements of Romanian socialism, the threat of foreign interference, and the enemy of the state. This is the same speech he had been given 100 times before. Then, someone from the crowd shouted, "His words are unclear, but the tone is unmistakable, it's anger." Pure anger against the biggest dictator. Another voice joined, then another. The whole crowd began to fracture as genuine emotion broke because people had been suffering for way too long. Within seconds, that polite applause is transformed into a low, growing roar. People suddenly realize that they outnumber their oppressors, which is quite less. The change in Ceaușescu's face was immediate. This was a man who had never in 24 years of power experienced any sort of public defiance. This confusion was new to him and flickered across his features like he was noticing something devastating. It was like watching a predator realize it had become prey. He even tried to continue raising his voice above the chaos, but his words were lost. Elena grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. For the first time in decades, Ceaușescu looked like what they truly were, two frightened old people facing a mob that wanted their blood and them too. Go away. His security suddenly appeared and then hustled him off the balcony. The broadcast was cut to static. At that moment, everyday Romanians saw something they had never seen before: weakness. This time, his regime could be challenged, and the dictator could be frightened. Within 48 hours, Ceaușescu would be fleeing Bucharest with all his powers lost. The escape. Then came December 22nd, the day after the disaster. The crowd outside the Central Committee building swelled to tens of thousands of people. Their chant became increasingly specific about what they wanted to do to the couple inside. Military units, who should have been defending the palace, were slowly retreating or even joining the protesters one by one. Ceaușescu's generals either refused orders or simply stopped answering their phones. The decision was already made to evacuate by helicopter from the building's roof. We can still see old footage that shows Nicolae and Elena climbing into the helicopter, clutching briefcases reportedly filled with foreign currency and gold. The dictator, who once commanded absolute obedience and had everyone shaking in fear, was fleeing like a common criminal. The helicopter pilot later described the flight as surreal because Nicolae kept demanding they fly to military bases where he believed loyal forces were waiting for them. These are bases that had been abandoned or were under revolutionary control. Elena even asked why people were turning against them. After everything they have done for Romania, you can tell the disconnect between her perception and reality was so complete that she genuinely seemed unable to understand why decades of brutality had provoked this response. However, even their aerial escape was short-lived. Within hours, even the helicopter crew abandoned them, landing on a highway outside Bucharest. They then stopped a car, ordered the driver to take them to Trugavite, and spent the journey listening to radio broadcasts about the revolution. Nicolae even angrily denounced it as a foreign coup. The driver took them to an agricultural center, locked them in an office, and called the local army garrison. Romania's most feared dictator had become a prisoner now. Mock trial. The provisional government that emerged from the chaos faced a brutal calculation. Every moment the church schools remained alive, it was a moment loyalist forces could organize a rescue or even counter-revolution. Then, on the evening of December 24, the National Salvation Front created an extraordinary military tribunal specifically to try the couple. Romania's provisional president at that time appointed General Victor to organize the trial. It would happen the next day, Christmas Day. 8 paratroopers from Botany were loaded into helicopters for what they said was a Grade 0 mission. They didn't even know they had been selected to form a fire squad. The trial began at dawn on December 25 in a small room at Military Unit 01417 in Trugavite. The outcome was predetermined, and everyone knew it. The couple was charged with genocide, destruction of public assets, and even undermining state powers. The prosecution claimed that Nicolae was responsible for 60,000 deaths, though it was unclear whether this meant deaths during the revolution or even his whole 24-year rule. The trial lasted less than 2 hours. Here, Nicolae refused to recognize the court's authority, calling it illegitimate, and demanding his constitutional right to face a proper tribunal. He even accused the judges of being traitors and claimed the whole revolution was a Soviet conspiracy. Elena then went from fury into disbelief. At one point, she reportedly even asked if it was all a joke. Her inability to accept that the people she had oppressed for decades now held her life in their hands was perhaps the most brutal evidence of how power had corrupted her reality. The defense attorneys who were appointed to represent them did nothing. They even found them guilty of all charges and asked them to be sentenced to death. After minutes of deliberation, the verdict finally came down, which was death by firing squad and immediate execution. The execution. The Ceaușescus were led to a small courtyard after that, where 7 paratroopers waited, armed, logged, and loaded. Captain Lionel Boiru was the one who led the firing squad and later described Nicolae's appearance before the trial. He said that the dictator was unrecognizable, white as a sheet, hair all ruffled up, and unshaven. He was still waiting after shaving because he smelled nice. Elena's final words were a desperate attempt to pretend she had been a mother to the Romanian people. The irony here was devastating. Nicolae maintained his defiance to the end, reportedly shouting revolutionary slogans even as the soldiers raised their weapons. The execution was over in seconds. A cameraman rushed into the courtyard just as the shooting ended and captured footage of bodies on the ground. This actual moment of execution wasn't filmed, but the aftermath was. Footage of the trial and the executed couple was broadcasted to Romanian television the same day. The provisional government needed people to see with their own eyes that their tormentors had finally ended. Across Romania, people gathered around television sets and wept not from sadness but from relief and joy, because now their nightmare was finally over. Initially, their bodies were covered with canvas and then transported to Bucharest and buried in a cemetery on December 30th. In 2010, they were exhumed for identification and reburied to this date. A group of his supporters, who are mostly elderly prisoners who remember guaranteed jobs and housing, visit the grave to place flowers. On Nicolae's birthday, January 26, large crowds even gathered. The revolution claimed over 1,000 lives, but most died after their capture in a clash with mysterious terrorists whose identities were never even confirmed. This has led many Romanians to believe that the revolution was actually a coup by former communist elites who wanted power for themselves. As for the trial itself, even those involved later expressed ambivalence. The generals from that time set the whole act as, "This act killed Romanians, but so did Ceaușescu's whole regime." It violated every principle of due process. The trial lasted less than 2 hours, and the verdict was already predetermined. The defense did nothing. It was revenge that was dressed in legal clothing, and everyone knew it. Do you think the brutal dictator got the death that he was supposed to get? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel for more videos like these.